Hola, and welcome to another Spanish lesson. In this lesson, we're going to be looking at subject pronouns. So grab your cuadernos and your bolígrafos and let's get started. Now, one of the things that you want to know about your parts of speech is that the parts of speech in English behave the same way as our parts of speech in Spanish. Nothing has changed. So just because they have crossed languages, it doesn't mean that they function any differently. So a verb in English, which is an action verb, is a verb in Spanish, which is also an action verb. A noun in English, which is a naming verb, is also a noun in Spanish, which is also a naming verb, a naming word rather, not a naming verb, right? And so your pronouns in English, the same way that the pronouns behave in English, is the same way that they're going to be behaving in Spanish, all right? So let's get started on our subject pronouns. Now, one of the things that you want to know about your subject pronouns, or pronouns overall in this case, is that they take the place of a noun. They take the place of a noun. And so if you have a naming word or a word that has been given a name, and you keep repeating it, the pronoun steps in and says, hey, you don't have to keep repeating yourself. Let me take your place. That's what the pronouns do. Now, in Spanish, we want to bear a couple of things in mind. We have, in grammar generally, we have what is called first person, second person, and third person. What the first person is, generally speaking, is one person or the individual who is doing the speaking. And that tends to be I. For the second person, it's the first person who is making reference to another person. So I am talking to you. And then for the third person, you and I are talking about him or her. And so this is what we normally have in English, I must say. He, she, or it. Now, these are all singular in a sense. Then we're going to have our plural forms. And for the plural, a lot of I's. So I and I and I and I becomes we. A lot of yous become you all. And a lot of he's and she's become they. This is how it looks in English. But we're not doing it in English now, are we? We're doing it in Espanol. And so for your subject pronouns in Spanish, here's what's going to happen. This first person singular is going to be called yo. Or second person singular is going to be called tú. And there's an accent on that you. Or third person singular is going to be called él for he, ella for she. Now in Spanish, we don't really have an it form in our third person singular pronoun. What we have is another you, and we're going to be discussing those in a little bit. And that other you is called usted. It's abbreviated BD, usted. For the we have two words. Same word, but two different endings. We have nosotros and we have nosotras. Now, one of the things with Spanish that you're going to be noticing is that you have a gender specific way of speaking. And so the nosotros indicates masculine persons. So all of the I's and I's and I's. They're all males, masculine, or it could be a mixture of genders. So it could be males and females who become I. And if it's all female, it would be nosotras. So let me write that here. Let me see if I can scribble that here for you. So the nosotros is males or mixed gender. And then the nosotras is all female. Now here's an interesting thing. This you all that we have here in English, in Spanish, well, in Latin American Spanish, I should say, because it is used in maybe 2 Latin American countries and mostly in Spain, where they have a second person plural form. But in Latin American Spanish, generally, we don't really use that form. And so this you all tends to move down here. And so in addition to the they, we're going to pluralize the L and the ella. So we're going to have ellos, ellas, and is ustedes. And it's abbreviated BDS. And so we're not going to really focus too much on that second person plural form for that. Now, in Spanish, these pronouns work with your verbs. So when we move into our other lesson on verb conjugation, you're going to see how the pronouns take the place of the nouns in working with the verbs. And so they work kind of hand in hand, all right? But let me just give this to you because this looks very, if someone just looks at it, they may be wondering what's going on here. But let me just give it to you in terms of a nice column, a nice neat column. And so we're going to do it vertically. And so let's give back our first person, second person, third person. And these are all singular. Let us see if we can write the word singular here. And what did we say our words are again? For our first person, yo. Second person, to with an accent. Third person, él, ella, usted, abbreviated VD. And then we move to our first person again. This is now going to be the plural section. And our third person. And these are our plural pronouns. And here we have nosotros or nosotras. And then we have ellos, ellas, ustedes. Let's get the English in. So yo is I, tú is you, and we're going to speak about the two in a little bit. Before we leave these pronouns in this lesson, we're going to speak about the two. Él is he, ella, she, and usted means you. And for this one, it is formal. We're going to speak about that as well. Nosotros and nosotras, they both mean we. Ellos and ellas, they, and the ustedes, plural ustedes, you all. Let's draw some arrows to make sure that we see what they are. So first person singular, yo, means I. Second person singular, tú, and it means you, the familiar you. Third person singular, él, ella, usted, and the L, I'm going to use a different color for the L. Let's pick a nice purple. The L means he, the ella means she, and the usted means the formal you. Then the first person plural is nosotros or nosotras, and it means we. Third person plural, we have ellos, ellas, ustedes, and the meanings that they go with, ellos goes with they, ellas also goes with they, and the ustedes goes with you all. Now, the final thing that I want to bring to your attention, let us discuss those two versions of the word you. Very important. So we have tú with an accent, and you want to be very careful about putting that accent in, because you do have tú without the accent as well. Tú without the accent means your, but tú with the accent is your subject pronoun, which means you. And we have usted. And they both mean you. But we know when it comes down to Spanish that even if you have two words that mean the same thing, there's going to be a distinction between the two. And so the tú with the accent is the familiar you. Now, what happens with this is in Spain, or in Spanish, I should say, in the Spanish language, they are very big on formalities. They're very big on being professional. They're very big on making distinctions between ranks and all of those things. So with the familiar you, what happens is if you're speaking to a friend, if you're speaking to someone that you're familiar with, if you're speaking to someone who's on your level, so as students, you're speaking to a fellow student and you're saying you would use the tú. However, the usted is your formal you. And this one is used when you're speaking to persons who are above you in rank, someone who you're not familiar with, someone who is obviously older, and therefore respect is due to that person. That is when you use that formal you. So the example that I would give is your students, and suppose your principal enters the room and you want to say you would not say tú, you would say usted. If it's someone that you do not know and you're not familiar with the person at all, you would not say tú, you would say usted. And actually, if you use tú with someone who is a stranger or someone that you're not familiar with, offense may be taken. So you want to be very careful with that. And so that is the difference really between the tú and the usted. They mean the same thing, but of course, you know, in Spanish, they mean the same thing, but they cannot be used interchangeably. They mean the same thing, but that is the basic breakdown of the difference between the two. And so, ladies and gentlemen, damas y caballeros, in a nutshell, these are your subject pronouns. 5 sets of them, and I'm very specific in saying 5 because when you look at your verb lessons, you're going to see where the subject pronouns come in very handy. I must say, in some cases, in most cases really, the verb in its conjugated state has the subject pronoun kind of intertwined with it, but I like to teach my students and tell them, use the subject pronouns for a number of reasons. One, you want to become familiar with these words. You want to know what they mean. So if you see them in a comprehension passage, you know what they mean. If you have to use them, if you have to use them in writing, you know how to use them. Another reason why you want to actually learn them is that you want to be able to switch them out at any given point in time. And so, for example, especially for the third persons, where if a name is being used, so if I say, Roberto es un niño, Roberto es un estudiante, Roberto es un niño bajo y delgado. Rather than repeating Roberto, 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 I would at some point change Roberto for L, because Roberto is a boy and L would mean he. So I'm changing out the name for the pronoun. As I said at the beginning, the same thing that pronouns do in English is the same things they do in Spanish. Ladies and gentlemen, damas y caballeros, thank you for sitting out in this lesson. And I hope that at the end of all of this, you're going to go and you're going to really study these subject pronouns. Until we meet again, adios.